Good morning and welcome to the channel, everybody. Now, today's show is going to be the kind of show that you've never seen before. We're going to look at a series of consecutive biblical passages that clearly track the lineage of the Nephilim giants after the flood. Now, people are very resistant to the serpent seed doctrine. Yet, we see the serpent seed giants proliferating alongside humanity after the flood in the Bible. And that's what we're going to look at today. The intermingling of the serpent seed giants after the flood, which means there is a serpent seed walking among us right now. Now, these giants were descended from fallen angels. This is what the book of Genesis tells us. And the evidence is undeniable. Now, lots of channels talk about giants after the flood, and they do a great job, but we're going to actually dig way deeper. We're going to look at where they came from. We're going to track these bloodlines. We're going to see who their forefathers were. And we're going to look at the Nephilim giants of renown in the Old Testament. And they all have a common father. And that father was Ham. Now, before that, there is really no sure way to know who mothered the Nephilim races of the Old Testament before Ham. Some say that it was a wife of Noah. Some say that it was a wife of Ham. But what's important here is to note is that there were giants, and they were mixed with fallen angel blood, and they existed after the flood. They survived. We don't know how, but they did. And the Bible seems to infer that these giants also coexisted and mixed with their human-sized counterparts, which means that many of these lines may still exist today. Now, most of these giants were hunted down, but many of them were not. And as time went on, their stature become less and less as they began to, be watered down, let's say, so to speak. Because people say, "Oh, Casey, well, how could this happen? How can a giant have relations with a normal-sized person?" Well, how did Ham father the giant bloodline? How did that happen? And how did his wife give birth to what would soon be a giant? You see, there's something happening here, and we can't claim to understand it all from an anatomical perspective, but the fact of the matter is this what the biblical record says. Now, it's naive to believe that every single last one of these giants was hunted down and that they eradicated the entire bloodline. That would be a stretch, actually. The more believable scenario is that they're among us and are interceded into the human race. And this is why Jesus had to spill his blood to correct the corrupted blood. This was the whole point of the matter, was that there was an incursion into mankind. There were probably several incursions. We could talk about that as well. There were probably a few times, one in the book of Genesis at the very beginning of time through Satan, and another one right before the flood. People say, "Oh, that's crazy. How Satan couldn't do that." But then they accept the biblical passages that talk about giants in the earth before the flood. They accept that, and that happened somehow from angel falling from their first estate into the human estate, but then they don't accept that could have happened in the garden. See, so we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this. We're also going to examine why Yahweh commanded the Israelites to wage genocide on certain tribes in the Old Testament. And the reason is, as you will see, is because these tribes were giants who were hunting down God's people. They were cursed and judged since right after the flood. Now, let's dig into this. Our journey begins just after the flood. when Ham, Noah, and his brothers and all their wives got off the ark. This is Genesis 10. Let me make sure we're connected. We'll keep going with this decode today. Thanks everybody for showing up. We got on here a little bit early, but this will be a show to remember. So Genesis 10 talks about the generations of the son of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Makesh and Tiras. The sons of Gomer, the sons of Javan. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their family in the nations. And the sons of Ham, Cush and Mizraim and Put in Canaan. Now, Mizraim means Egypt. And this is one of the very first mentions in the entire Bible of the word Mizraim that you see here. So I'm starting to wonder, who is Mizraim? Was Mizraim the first giant pharaoh? Here is the concordance showing you that Mizraim means Egypt. Now, you start to wonder, was Egypt maybe Menes? Menes was the first pharaoh. Maybe Mizraim and Menes are the same, or maybe not. Here's the concordance showing that Mizraim means son of Ham and Egypt. And again, this is the first time in the Bible that Egypt is ever mentioned, just after the flood. Now, some theories state that the Egyptians were the giants that existed before the flood, which was the cause of the flood. God sent the flood to wipe the giants away or put them in check, and this would explain the destruction of Egypt. Some say that Egypt was inundated by a flood. But here's the Wikipedia page on Mizraim. And as you'll see here, it talks about what possibly happened. According to Genesis, Mizraim, son of Ham, was a younger brother of Cush, an elder brother of Put in Canaan, whose families together made up the Hamite branch of Noah's descendants. Mizraim's sons talks about, according to the Eusebius Chronicon, Manetho had suggested that the great age of antiquity which the later Egyptians boasted had actually preceded the flood, and that they were really descended from Mizraim, who settled there anew. A similar story is related by medieval Islamic historians. It talks about the Egyptians and the Persians, stating that the pyramids had been built in the wicked races before the deluge. So this is their theory, but that Noah's descendant Mizraim was entrusted with reoccupying the region afterwards. The Islamic accounts also make Masar the son of Bansar and grandson of Ham rather than a direct son of Ham. Some scholars think it is likely that Mizraim is a dual form of the word miser, meaning land, and translated literally into ancient Egyptian, two lands, by early pharaohs. But according to this guy, Synchilus, it says Mizraim was a legendary first pharaoh, Menes. This is what we postulated, that he was actually Menes, the first pharaoh. And he unified the old kingdom and built Memphis. So there's a lot of evidence here that something is not what it seems. Now our search continues back to the Bible in 1 Chronicles. So remember, we're tracking these bloodlines after the flood. So let's go to 1 Chronicles 1. And if we look at 11, Mizraim, remember, Egypt, begat Ludim, Ananimin, and Lebahim, and Naphtali. Naphtali sounds a bit like Nephilim. But then in 12, it says, and Pushreim and Casluhim, of whom came the Philistines. So here's our first clue in the search to tracking the bloodlines. So Ham, father of Mizraim, father of the Philistines, which was Goliath, a giant. Now, remember in Genesis 10:6, it says, the children of Ham, one of them was Cush, who begat Nimrod. And Nimrod was possibly a giant as well, because he was of great stature. So all these children of Ham were different. Also, remember, Canaan was a son of Ham, and he was cursed by Noah himself. So what was the reason for that? Now we get into 1 Chronicles 13. This Canaan begat Zidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, the Amorites, and the Girgashites, the Hivites. And now you're starting to see some of the names of some of the peoples that the Israelite armies battled later in history. The Amorites and the Jebusites. And I believe the Hivites as well. And these were the first tribes that spun off from Canaan, the son of Ham, who was cursed. So now we're following these cursed bloodlines. Now, if we go over to Deuteronomy 20:17, whoops, I don't know how to spell Deuteronomy. 20:17, it goes even into more detail about these very children of Canaan, son of Ham. And it says here, but thou shalt utterly destroy them. This was the curse and the judgment that God had on these peoples. It says, but of these cities of these people, which the Lord thy God doth give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth. Thou shalt utterly destroy them. The Hittites, the Amorites, which we just talked about, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. These are all son of Canaan, right? So now you're understanding the judgment that was brought upon them. Now, if we go into Numbers, we see more of these descendants. Numbers chapter 13. And here's the story of the 12 scouts of the Israelites. They went out into the land of Canaan. And what did they find? They found descendants of Canaan. The same ones from 1 Chronicles 1:13 through 15. They found the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites. And what did they have to say about those peoples? Let's take a look here. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anac. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea. Remember, these peoples are children of Canaan, child of Ham. You can call them basically Hamites. They're all descended from Ham. But look at this. What did they have to say about these people? And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. They were the first cannibals. And all the people that we saw in them were men of great stature. They were giants. Do you see how now the serpent seed doesn't sound so far-fetched? And there we saw the giants, the son of Anac, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers. And so we were in their sight. This was a land of giants and cannibals. And these scouts were horrified. Now, who were the children of Anac that are mentioned back here? Well, there's more to that story too. I think I have that pulled up here. They were the Anakim. Now, according to Joshua, in Joshua 11, the sons of Anac, the Anakim, they later in history hid with other giants, the Philistines in Gaza and Gath. Let's read about the Anakim. They were described as a race of giants, descended from Anac according to the Old Testament. Let's go back to Joshua and show you that as we're reading this. Joshua 11. And I told you this was going to be a deep dive today. Hopefully you guys are enjoying what we're putting out here, because this is, no one really tracked all this to this degree yet with this detail. So we're doing it here. So there's no doubt in your mind that there are giant bloodlines among us. They were none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel. Only in Gaza and Gath and Ashdod there remained. So this is where they were. They hid in Gaza and Gath. This is where the Philistines were. That's where they hid out. Now let's read more about these peoples here. And they lived, these are the Anakim. They were said to have lived in the southern part of the land of Canaan, near Hebron. They inhabited the region later known as Edom and Moab in the days of Abraham. There may have come from the Hebrew word meaning necklace or neck chain. Wonder what that's about. Their formidable appearance, as described by the 12 spies, which we just read about, sent to search the land, filled the Israelites with terror. They seem to have been identified with the Nephilim and giants of the antediluvian age. Joshua finally expelled them from the land, except for some who found refuge in the Philistine cities of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Thus, the Philistine giant Goliath, whom David encountered, were descendants of the Anakim. Wow. Now, it is thought that the Goliath and the other Philistines were descendants of the Anakim, making the Anakim sons of Mizraim. Now, let's get back into Numbers, because there are more stories of giants in the Bible after the flood. Numbers chapter 21 talks about another giant. This was Og of Bashan. And he's in chapter 33. And they turned and went up the way of Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, went out against them, he and all his people, to the battle of Edrei. Now, Og was interesting because he had a bedstand that was about 13 feet long. And he was an Amorite giant. Remember, we tracked the Amorites. Descendants of Canaan once again. Let's go into Deuteronomy and read about Og's bedstand and how big it was. So this is Deuteronomy 2. There, I spelled it wrong again. And let's go look at 11 here. Also accounted as giants, as the Anakims of the Moabites called them, Emmons. Well, I think I'm in the wrong verse here. So here's Og in 2133. And where do they talk about his bedstand? Let's type in Og bed. Let's try that. Oh, here we go. Deuteronomy 3:11. For only King Og of Bashan remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstand was a bedstand of iron. It is not in Rabbath of the children of Ammon, ? 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth thereof, after the cubit of a man. So, this is about 13 feet long. He was probably 12 feet tall, twice the size of a normal human being. Now, the TV series Game of Thrones depicts some giants that are approximately the size that Og was. Okay. Now there's more. Let's go back into 1 Chronicles. And here they talk about Goliath's Philistine brother, who was a giant. He was killed. Let's read about him. 20 verse 5. And there was war with the Philistines, and Elhanan, the son of Jair, slew Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite. So there's Lami, he's the brother of Goliath, whose spear staff was like a weaver's beam. So there's this staff, right? What is a weaver's beam? Well, many people try to speculate as to how thick a weaver's beam was, and it's about 2.5 inches thick. Now imagine trying to throw a spear that is 2.5 inches thick. That would be thrown by a giant. There was also a man from Gath with 6 fingers and 6 toes. And so what was Gath? Well, Gath was a place. It was one of 5 Philistine city-states. And Goliath was from Gath, which is probably why the word or name Gath sounds like it could contain the word Goliath in it, right? So this was his city, and he was a giant, and there were people with 6 fingers and 6 toes. Now, we see that today. There are people running around with 6 fingers and 6 toes. Let's pull that up real quick. Let's look at celebrities with 6 fingers and 6 toes. Now, for those of you with weak stomachs, you might not want to look at this, but there are celebrities out there with 6 toes. Most of them have cut them off and removed them, but it is well known that people like Halle Berry and Oprah have extra toes. Now, people try to write this off as Photoshop. No, it is not Photoshop. This is a real condition that some people get, and it's called, I forget what it's called, but it's basically, it's a genetic trait. Where do you think this genetic trait came from? It's the bloodline of giants that we're still with. It's the serpent seed. Now, this doesn't make you a bad person if you're someone that has this. It just proves that we need Jesus. All are saved if you believe in him. Now, some choose the way of giving in to the sin that's crouching at the door, and others run towards the arms of Jesus. But this is what's going on. This is the truth. It cannot be denied. Do you think it's an accident that some people are walking around with 6 fingers and 6 toes, and then the Bible mentions the very same people that were descended from giants? That's not an accident. Now, let's go back to 1 Chronicles and 20 verse 8. And these were born unto the giant in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. So David was the one who killed them. And this is the bloodline of giants. Now, who is the holy bloodline? Well, when we go back to Genesis 10, the pure bloodline is tracked through the bloodline of Shem. Shem was the forefather of Abram or Abraham. So there's a pure bloodline and there is an impure bloodline. Now, there are even more giants mentioned in 2 Samuel. Let's take a look at that. 2 Samuel verse 21. And down in verse 16. And Ishbibnob, that's a funny name, we'll call him SpongeBob, which was one of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight, he being girded with a new sword, thought to have slain David. And so, what is this? How many shekels? How many pounds is 300 shekels? Well, it's hard to really know, but we're looking at about 8 pounds if you use some of these conversions here. And an 8-pound spearhead is about 5 to 10 times the normal weight of a normal spearhead. That's massive. Now, let's keep reading down in here because there's more. But Abishai, the son of Zerach, succored him, whatever that means, and smote the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David sware unto him, saying, Thou shalt go no more out with us to battle, that thou shalt quench not the light of Israel. So they're trying to protect David here, preventing him from going into battle. And it came to pass after this, there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sabekah, the Hushathite, slew Saph. Who was Saph? He was a son of the giant. He was a descendant of Rapha, actually. Now, how did God feel about this giant bloodline? Well, he had words for the Israelites in the book of Ezra, chapter 9. And what did he tell them? He said, Now when these things were done, the princes came to me, saying, The people of Israel and the priests and Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the lands, doing according to their abominations, even of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites. These are all the sons of Cain, and the Ammonites, Moabites, and the Egyptians. Egyptians would be sons of Mizraim, and the Amorites. See how all these came from Ham. They're all giants. So, we're not supposed to be mixing with the corrupted bloodline according to the rules for the Israelites. Now, they had a specific covenant with God that we don't have. Okay, because that has already come and passed. Christ completed that. He was the last in the bloodline of the Israelites. He came and finished it. That covenant ended. Those rules for which God set out for those peoples. Now we are all together under Christ, and there are no such rules. So, who were the Israelites? They were giant hunters. And the crazy thing is they were outsized and outmatched by these giants. And the only reason why they won is because Yahweh protected them. Now, I found this article talking about the topic of these genocides that occurred in the Bible. Because a lot of people judge Yahweh for what he did, or they call him the devil. They say he wasn't the real God. They can't make these things jive in their mind until you go back and look at what I just showed you, that they were already judged. because they weren't completely wiped out by the flood. So you can't judge God for doing it. These were corrupted bloodlines. They had corrupted our bloodlines, causing us to have tendencies towards sin. Let's read about this paper, and I'll pin all this in the pinned comment. Genesis 9:25-27. Scripture begins to forecast that God will judge the Canaanites. This is seen in Noah's curse of Canaan, Ham's youngest son, after Ham acted dishonorably toward his father. This curse specified that Canaan would be the lowly servants of his brothers, especially to Shem, the predecessor of the Hebrews. Several generations later, one can begin to sense the trajectory of conflict when Genesis 12:6, Abraham arrives in Canaan only to find that there were Canaanites in the land. A more complete explanation is given in Genesis 15:16, where God informs Abraham that fulfillment of the promise to him would be delayed, in part because the sin of the Amorites is not yet complete. So he's giving them chances. For Merrill, the notion of being complete suggests that the Canaanite sin was to become beyond remedy and could therefore be dealt with only by destruction. God waited for centuries while the Amalekites and those other Canaanite groups slowly filled up their own cups of condemnation by their sinful behavior. Remember, they were eating people. They were cannibals. God never acted precipitously toward them. His grace and mercy waited to see if they would repent and turn from their headlong plummet into destruction. Far from being maliciously vindictive or quick to judge, God's attitudes toward unrepentant Canaanites was one of mercy and patience. What then were the sins that the Canaanites performed? Understanding the depravity of the Canaanites will help the 21st century tolerant, sensitive reader to understand the harshness of God's judgment. Clay Jones has written extensively on the subject of Canaanite sins and gives evidence for 6 especially deplorable sins of the Canaanites. Now, before we get into those sins, make sure we're still alive here. All right, we're good. Let's keep going with this. The first sin of the Canaanites, and that which seems to have birthed all the others, is idolatry. Whenever an individual or a nation chooses to serve another god besides Yahweh, be it self, pride, lust, or any number of other idols, more sin will surely follow. Truly, it was the Canaanite idolatry which led to the myriad of other sins which enslaved them. Their gods exercised deplorable morality and humiliating behavior. One text depicts the Canaanite god El as a drunkard plashing in his own excrement and urine. Wow, after a banquet. Obviously, if this is one's view of God, one's moral life is sure to be skewed, as is evidenced by the Canaanites. You see now how dangerous it is for you to assume that Yahweh is the devil? That's blasphemy. So the channels that are out there saying that, shame on them. You're making blasphemous accusations against the Most High God, and you're judging God. It's bad enough to judge each other, but to judge God, that would put you in very, very shaky ground in terms of your salvation. The second sin of the Canaanites is incest. Not surprisingly, the gods of the Canaanites were highly that themselves. We're not going to say this word over and over again, but you see the word there. The most revered god, Baal, had relations with his mother, Asherah, his sister, and his daughter. None of these acts were presented negatively. The Canaanite laws after the 14th century BC penalized that word with no more than a fine, while other nations in the ancient Near East may have written laws against this because it produces deformed babies. Now, why would they be doing this? Well, that's called inbreeding. They're trying to preserve their bloodlines of the giants and the serpent seed, right? Now, could you imagine for a second, had these giants repented? Can you imagine what life would be like now? You've got a giant at the pulpit giving a sermon. That would be crazy, right? But God gave them a chance. But they were prone to sin because of their blood. Now it says here some manuscripts, such as the Egyptian dream books, show that that word was somewhat of a fantasy. Also interesting is the account of Genesis 19, in which Lot's daughters were pregnant by getting their father drunk. The context shows that this family had only recently escaped Sodom and Gomorrah, Canaanite cities destroyed for their wickedness. Thus it seems that the exceedingly wickedness of the Canaanite civilization had rubbed off on Lot's family. Now, a lot of people criticize Lot and all this for doing this. God has patience, but that patience ends. And there were holy people and people that God loved that still did wrong things. So this doesn't condone what happened here. Okay? Following the theme of the degradation of the family, the third sin of the Canaanite adultery was also rampant. This was in large part due to their fertility religions, which involves temple sex. In the Canaanite religion, the queen of heaven became the woman among the gods, patron of eroticism and sensuality, of conjugal love, as well as adultery of brides, and that word and those words. So this is where America is headed. The queen of heaven and similar gods were honored by worshippers imitating the gods' actions. Thus, the Canaanite religion involved priests drawn from priestly families and also sacred women that give their bodies away, both male and female, in fact. So, these were the sins. They were very deep and involved. They were having that with that to be repeated 5 times by the company and singers of the assembly. So this was right there in the temple, okay? So these fertility cults, all this came out of the Canaanites. And finally, this is probably the one that finally pushed God over the edge, was sacrifice of children. And it says here it was the most offensive. And God commanded the Israelites, because this was starting to rub off on them, and he told them, do not sacrifice your children to Molech in the fire. Molech was the god of the Canaanites. Do you see now why God had to genocide them? Does this make sense yet? So if you try to say that Yahweh was the devil, then you're basically making excuses for people who worship Molech. You're saying that that was okay because Yahweh was against this. It wasn't because he, I even think the word jealous is mistranslated. God is not a jealous God, but that's the word they put in there to make you scratch your head and make you think, oh, he's just like a little boy who's jealous because people worship other gods. No, it's because the worship of these other gods was tragic and made these people sin. That's why. So, if you've been following these channels who tell you that Yahweh's the devil, you need to repent right now. You need to make a choice. Because you can't continue to follow my channel and still follow those channels. And God is calling you to account with what I've shown you today. Now, we're not going to get into all this other stuff, but it goes even way deeper. So, that's what I wanted to show you guys today. And this sums it up. I can't remember who sent this to me. Just got this. Look at this. Social distancing. They have this device. And look at how they depict the device helping you to maintain social distancing. This is the Vesica Piscis. and it represents the two seeds, the serpent seed and the holy seed. And where they cross over is the woman, the anatomy of the woman. And so this is interesting that they are depicting this here, the social distancing, and where they're taking humanity. You're in a bubble. You're in a seed. And electronics is what's keeping you divided. Thanks to the person that sent this to me. I'll link this in the pinned comment as well. But all around us, we have imagery depicting how all this works. The two seed lines, the enmity between the two seeds. The serpent bruising her in the heel, and her bruising the serpent in the head. All right, let's go into the chat here. We are living in the days of Noah now. Exactly, Marion. Okay. Yahweh is the Most High. Absolutely. Beyond a shadow of a doubt. And if you think he's the devil, then you're basically running interference for the Molech and all their practices, which Yahweh hated. This is why he had to enact these judgments. We're not to be judging the Most High. That will get you in hot water very quickly. It sounds great when you hear someone juggling scriptures around, right? It sounds like they're making sense, but they're really not. It's sensationalism. It's to get you to chip away at your faith because you're already putting God on trial. So, King James Version was written by a Freemason. Well, it wasn't written, it was translated. You got to get the semantics straight. Translated. That's why we go into the original texts, ancient texts, and we use the concordance and we translate it the way it's supposed to be translated. Don't get caught up in that. That's what the atheists use to try to discredit the Bible. Oh, it was written. It wasn't written. It was translated. That's all. You think God doesn't have a way for us to interpret the Bible correctly? Where's your faith? All right. Yeah, they might have added the numbers, possibly. Okay. Now, that's outside the fact that God mentioned and spoke of the Old Testament God he quoted him several times, talking about how great he was. You can look that up for yourself. And if Jesus talked about Yahweh as a great and honorable God, then you trying to say that he's not, you're contradicting Jesus. Is that where you want to be? I think not. So just go into the New Testament and read about the stories that God talked about the Old Testament God, if you're still in doubt. And rebuke and go away from those channels teaching you this lie. Okay. All right, some of you got to take off. I'm glad we started early so some of you could watch the entire show. Now, what are we doing tomorrow? We're going to talk about the new social distance and mask guidelines for people that have already taken the VC. And now all of a sudden, they're saying you can not have to wear a mask and you don't have to social distance. So which is it? Do they have to or do they not? So they're changing the goalposts once again. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. We're also going to talk about Biden's dog bites, because now all of a sudden that's confirming everything we said about Biden meaning bitten. Remember? Everyone thought, you're crazy. You're just reading stuff into things. No, Biden means bitten. He's the one that's administering the bite. And Mr. T, the Don, was the one who made the venom. And this is all about the serpent bite. So apparently Joe Biden's dog is going around biting people. And that's just more spiritual manifestation is what that is. Revealing the truth and confirming a lot of the things that we talk about on this channel. Now, it's interesting to postulate about, where are these giants' bones? Well, a lot of them were uncovered as the settlers went across America, because the Cherokee have basically a spoken, I guess you call it their tradition, their spoken tradition. They don't write a lot of things down, the Cherokee Indians, but their spoken tradition talks about them being giant hunters. And they may have been one of the tribes of Israel that were in here in America. And they hunted down these giants across the Great Plains. And it is said that the Smithsonian has gone through, and every time one of these skeletons was unearthed, the Smithsonian would rush in and confiscate the evidence, cordon off the area. There are old stories from the 1800s and early 1900s of this happening. And then mysteriously, no one would ever find the bones. They're probably sitting under the Vatican, is my guess, in a big warehouse for only certain people's eyes. But one day, someone will find one of these skeletons. A farmer somewhere out in Iowa or Missouri will be tilling up their field or clearing trees, and they will find one of these giant skeletons, and it will turn the world upside down. Of course, they'll have some cover story for it. They'll call it a genetic anomaly. They'll say it's because the person's pituitary gland didn't do its job and they grew out of control. They make up all kinds of stories. But the truth of the matter is the biblical record already exposed this. So, all right, we're going to end the show here. Thanks everybody for showing up. Thanks everybody for subscribing to the backup channel. The link is in the description. If you haven't already, we're going to be doing some shows and some videos there only. Most of probably the montages that we do will probably upload over there, and then we'll do our live shows here. Still kind of juggling things around, but thanks for helping to get that channel back up and running. So we'll have a backup in case this one gets taken down. So now we're back up at full speed, and we're going to continue to uncover the lies of the enemy and glorify the Most High. Have a great day, everybody.